that we share this with the larger group. So we will be recording our webinar today, which is titled Let's Make a Deal with an Asterisk, because we can't negotiate on the law. But we are hoping, our goal really is to help you learn how to use your federal funds, understand how to use your federal funds in ways that meet your needs and still stay within the bounds of the law. Here we have Monty Hall, the host of Let's Make a Deal, which dates some of us, and the three lovely doors, the 1960s, 70s layout of Let's Make a Deal. No prizes today. Well, the prize is knowledge that you win for participating today. But we hope that we can make this enjoyable and educational at the same time. We do have three doors on our webinar today. We're going to talk about supplanting, door number one. That may be review for some of you, but it is a kind of a key benchmark that we need to pass before when we're talking about allowability. Door number two is around statute and regulation. Jen's going to talk with us about ESSA and UGG and the requirements of those two and how they play into allowability. Then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about making sure that your spending aligns with your approved narrative. And we know plans can change, and that's fine. We do want to make sure we keep those two on parallel tracks. And then there will be a bonus round where we talk about some examples, and we'll be sharing resources throughout the session. We'll also be pausing after each door to let you ask questions, and we'll try to capture those so we can share those also with the folks who are not with us today. So get ready, here we go. Door number one, we're going to start with supplement, not supplant. Excuse me. You can see the definitions here for those two words. Sometimes we refer to supplement, not supplant, as SNS. And really, the key reminders for supplement, not supplant are that supplementing means you are enhancing or expanding, and supplanting means you are replacing. And it's okay to supplement, but it's not okay to supplant. And what that means in terms of federal funds is federal funds are designed to be supplementary to state and local funds. We're not using our federal funds to replace costs that we would ordinarily be paying with state and local funds. And a good question really to ask is, would we be doing this activity if we didn't have these federal funds? If the answer to that question is yes, then we probably should not be using federal funds to do it. And there are lots of programs, right? Lots of federal programs. We are going to be talking today about Titles 1A, 2A, and 4A, because those are in our hula hoop. But there are supplanting rules for Perkins, for IDEA, for other title programs under ESSA. And each program can have a little bit of a different flavor when it comes to SNS. So you really do want to know what the requirements of the program are, which is why it's hard to answer the question, how do you determine if something is supplanting? And the answer is it depends on the program that you're dealing with. We do have a brief on this topic that addresses more than 1, 2, and 4. And we will be dropping those in the chat today, links to those. If you haven't been to our briefs page, I would really encourage you to go there. It's got a lot of good sort of basic information. We are always happy to answer any questions, but you can find a lot of information in those briefs. That's why we put them together. Okay, so let's start with Title II and Title IV. We're doing these two together because they follow the same supplanting rules. So for Title II and Title IV, there are really two tests that you need to think about when using considering using those funds. The first is whether or not the services or the program that you want to undertake with those funds is required by state, local, or federal law. If the answer to that question is yes, then it's probably supplanting to use Title II or Title IV to do it. If you're able to pass that first test and you know that what you're trying to do is not required by law, then the second question is, did we use general fund or state and local funds to pay for this particular activity in the previous year? If the answer to that question is yes, then again, you're probably in supplanting territory. We have a couple of examples that we wanted to share just to kind of make it, for those of you who are more concrete, like me. So in Title II, for example, in Oregon, there is a law that all K-5 schools have to have at least one teacher who is trained in dyslexia, receives the required dyslexia training. You can see the OAR that's listed there. So using Title II funds, even though Title II can be used to support professional learning, using it to pay for the one teacher who's required in each K-5 building to have this training would be supplanting because it is required by state law. You have to do it. However, you might decide that you want to have all of your teachers trained, or at least more than one in each building. And using Title II funds to train those additional teachers would be considered supplemental. It's over and above what is required by law. And so you could use your Title II funds to add on to the required training, putting additional teachers on that list. In the case of Title IV, if you have a 0.5 counselor that you are funding out of general funds, and you make the determination that it's a really good fit with Title IV, makes sense, supports safe and healthy students, we want to move that to Title IV. That would be supplanting because you had been paying for that person's salary the previous year with those general funds, and so moving it over to federal funds would be considered supplanting. But you may have determined that a full-time counselor is really necessary. The half-time counselor is making a big difference, but we really need a full-time counselor to support students, in which case you could use Title IV funds to bring that counselor's salary up to a full FTE. You could pay the other half of the salary with Title IV, and that would not be supplanting. There are lots of examples that we could give, and we get lots of questions about these. These are just two. But again, for Title II and IV, we're really talking about those two tests that you need to think about when you're making those decisions. Those are kind of the gates when it comes to supplement, not supplant for those two programs. Title I is quite different and the same. The same in that there are tests, fiscal tests, to ensure that the use of Title I funds are supplemental. But with the reauthorization under ESSA, the rules change. So Title I used to have to follow the tests, those first two tests, and then there was actually a third test that had to do with whether or not schools were receiving the same services, but Title I schools being paid with Title I funds and non-Title I schools being paid with general funds. That was a no-no. So there used to be three tests like there were for II and IV. Now it's different. We've got these three, you see our little graphic here. We have these three fiscal tests: maintenance of effort, methodology, and comparability. And methodology, you see on our graphic, the circle says supplement, not supplant. That's really the methodology piece of Title I-A. So we have these three different tests that we need to talk about, fiscal tests. We have briefs on each of these subjects as well that we encourage you to take a look at. We cannot capture in one slide the detail of all three of these, but we did want to try to provide kind of a high-level overview of what each of those three things means when it comes to supplement, not supplant. So the first one, methodology, is really about making sure that Title I schools receive all the state and local funds that they are entitled to. All schools are treated equitably when it comes to, or at least schools within the same grade band, right, are treated the same in terms of the allocation of funds, regardless of whether they receive Title I. Sometimes we hear this referred to as being your methodology being Title I neutral, right? So that Title I funds are really over and above any state and local funds that other schools receive. So no school is shortchanged of state and local funds just because they receive title funds. And you share your methodology with us in the SIP budget narrative. There are some districts that are not required to demonstrate a methodology. If you only have one school in your entire district, there isn't really any other way to distribute funds, right? It just goes to one school. So there are some exceptions to this, but that's the intention of methodology. Do Title I schools get their fair share of state and local funds? Comparability is the second test. And this is really about how the funds are used in buildings, right? So comparability is generally demonstrated in terms of staffing. Are Title I and non-Title I schools comparably staffed? And it's usually that ratio of staff to students. There are several different methods that you can use. We had a webinar on comparability not too long ago where we talked a little bit in more detail about this. And again, there are some districts that do not have to complete the comparability report, but this is where districts are really showing that those funds are being used equitably in those schools, across schools, whether they're Title I or non-Title I, right? And then the last one is maintenance of effort. And this is where the district demonstrates that they're really providing a consistent base of state and local funding from year to year. And this is something that ODE calculates. Districts submit data to us, and sort of on the back end, behind the scenes, maintenance of effort calculations are made, and we track that. And it's important to know that maintenance of effort, you have to not meet that 90% threshold twice within a 5-year period to be considered not meeting maintenance of effort. So it's not something that happens very often. It is something that our team is aware of and kind of tracking, and we would reach out to a district if we had any concerns about maintenance of effort. So those three things taken together for Title I-A are how you demonstrate that you are using Title I funds as supplemental funds. So that really means there's no line item tests for Title I anymore. You don't have to go line by line. Instead, you say we have a methodology that ensures all schools are receiving their equitable share of general funds. We assure that schools are receiving comparable services, and we maintain this steady base. So as long as the things you want to do with Title I funds are allowable under Title I, meet the purpose of the program, are aligned to your needs assessment, almost anything can be considered, supplemental in that case. All right, that was a lot of information. So we are going to pause for a minute. I'll take a real quick look and see if there's anything in the chat. Okay, I don't see any questions there. Anybody have a question they want to come off mute or put in the chat? All right. And Tanya, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Okay, I am going to turn it over to Jen, who is going to start with door number 2.
Alrighty, thanks, Sarah. Excuse me. So my part of this right now is we're going to talk about the rules and regulations behind what is allowable, what is not, why we ask more questions, all of the things that I'm assuming a lot of you are getting when we return and go through all the budget narratives. And by the way, thank you for your patience as we go through them. There are a lot of them. And unfortunately, we're down to 3 of us. So thanks for your patience. So when we, excuse me, are referring to allowability, and who says what's allowable or not? Well, the 2 primary sources are ESSA or ESEA. It's very specific uses articulated in the law. So for example, Title IV tells you that it needs to be well-rounded, safe and healthy students, something for technology, right? So there's that. The other part of it, which is much bigger and, in my opinion, harder to understand, is excuse me, EDGAR, the Education Department General Administrative Regulations, which is also connected to UGG, the Uniform Grants Guidance. And what that does is it tells all the federal grants have very specific rules that we're going to go into in the next slide, or in a couple slides, that are just not allowable. It doesn't matter what grant you have. But EDGAR kind of defines it a little more for the U.S. Department of Education. So That's where we're getting the information, and we have to, go through it. I will not bore you with reading all of these, but basically, UGG is based on 8 cost principles. The first one, which is the cost necessary, reasonable, and allocable. This is, I wouldn't say it's the most important one, but this is the one that we're working within the most because these are your maybe stuff, right? Like if it's not allowable, it's very clear. If it is allowable, is it necessary for the program? And is it a reasonable cost, right? So we're going to dive into that at the end, when we do our little quiz, um, kind of working within those 3 definitions and what they mean. It's also outlined in our allowability brief, which we can put in the chat. The other ones in here that are just, I'll highlight, not prohibited under state or local law. Perhaps there's something that is allowed federally, but the state of Oregon doesn't allow it. You can't use a grant for that. I can't think of any of those examples right now, but that would be one of them. Consistent with policies and regulations. It's not a cost share for another federal program. That I don't want to say it doesn't apply to us, but it doesn't. This one does not come up very often. So these are the 8 cost principles. The first one, though, is the one that we're going to focus on today. So allowable equals necessary, reasonable, and allocable, and we'll go into that equation on the next slide. But there are some things that are just no, not allowable, not even a maybe, can't do it. Alcohol can never be purchased with federal funds. I think we all know that. Entertainment, we're going to talk about in a minute. Construction, you cannot, ESSER stuff aside, those rules were a little different. You can't pay to, save up all your Title I funds and build a whole new classroom. You can't do that. And then store cards or gift cards, those in general are not allowable, but there is an exception that is made for expenses for students who qualify for McKinney-Vento services. So with entertainment, that is one that I think a lot of times, there's a lot of questions about, right? And so I can't say that UGG does a nice job of defining entertainment. It's like for amusement, that's not helpful. But an example here would be if you wanted to do an end of the year celebration, or for the 8th graders, and you want to take them to bowling, and it's not tied, and it's just for amusement and celebration, you can't do that. If it was tied to a very specific statute, or I'm sorry, it's not statute, it's standard, academic standard, that's different. Same with like a movie. You can't just go to the movies and, have a nice time. Something like that would only be approved in the essence of like you had a history lesson and you're going to go see this movie about that particular time period as like a culmination or wrap up. Another way to access the curriculum, right? So those are 4 that are relatively clear compared to the others. But so those are not allowable. The next slide will go into what that equation is, right? So what we know about allowable is it has to be necessary, needed for the operation of the program. And, in your needs assessment, you said, yes, we do need this, we do need a different social emotional program or whatever it might be, or science curriculum or something. If it's in there and it's improved in your narrative, that would meet the necessary test. Reasonable. Does the purchase exceed the cost of what a prudent person, again, federal definitions, would incur? So, food comes up a lot about this, right? Like snacks for family events. We want to get people in the building. We want to engage them. Food's a draw. This is true. However, we really encourage, it's in our brief as well, like how much money are you spending on this? Number one, we don't want you to get ripped off. Like Costco's suddenly charging you $50 a pizza. That's not reasonable, right? Um, or is it a large amount of your budget? Like if you're spending, you know, an extraordinary percentage on this activity, is that going to pass the headline test, right? Is that even reasonable? Or is there a different place that your funds could be used? So that's the reasonable part of it. And that does seem to be the most gray, right? And then allocable. All that means is, does it serve the purpose of the program? Is allowed, or I shouldn't say allowed, is it allowable? Sorry, is it permissible under federal, district, state, and local policies? So we know that under Title 1A, you can absolutely, it is allocable to get a regular classroom teacher. Absolutely, that's allocable, no problem. That one's a little more clear. It's the reasonable and necessary that are a little more gray. All right, next slide, please. No, I was like, I'm on. Okay, so we've kind of talked through these, but again, these are the big questions to consider when you're putting something in the budget narrative. Does this cost, like, did it show up in your comprehensive needs assessment and the school program plan if it's Title 1A, right? Like, is there a reason you're asking for this, right? That's tied to a plan. The second, is it necessary for the performance of a program? In general, if Title IV is going to go to increase students in the art, access to the arts or maybe more music classes, yes, instruments is probably necessary for that to happen, right? Is the cost allocable and charged in proportion to the benefit received? Again, that's that. How much are we paying? Is it worth it? Would it pass the headline test? Um, is the cost reasonable? Again, market prices. And then does it supplement, not supplant, which are the things that Sarah was speaking to earlier. Title I, as we know, is a little different with that. But for Title II and IV and other titles, it's if this is something that was, picked up by a general fund cost before, maybe last year, or it's to meet a requirement in federal or state statute, it's there's a chance that it is supplanting, and we're going to have to ask some other questions to see if it's allocable or not, or allowable or not. All right. A word about food. I love food. This comes up a lot. So here's what we know. For families, anything in green, great. Yellow, we'll talk about the meals, and then red is you can't do it. So for families, light refreshments for family engagement, absolutely allowable. What does light refreshments mean? How much money is that? I think that, that is a gray area. It would be hard to argue that a light refreshment, you know, that like a four-course meal is a light refreshment. Like that doesn't make sense, right? But we do have districts that ask, can we provide meals, right? With caution, maybe sometimes. Every time, no, no. Again, how much money are you spending on food at a particular building versus, the overall budget? What's reasonable? They don't define meals versus refreshments. However, proceed with caution here, and it's really got to be tied to this, like a need and how you're measuring the effectiveness. For students, snacks for extended day or summer, totally allowable. Obviously, emergency food and water for students navigating housing instability is allowable. All just fine. Lunches for field trips, this does come up sometimes. The answer to that is no, because of, you can tap the school nutrition program. Maybe there's, bag lunches they can take, whatever that might be, but you can't pay for it out of a title fund. And then staff. So staff, obviously, if you're traveling, the per diem, which is that rate set by the government, depending on where you're going, right? That's absolutely allowable. Costs associated with travel, food, hotel, etc. Yes. Food for professional development or staff celebrations are a no-go. There's a very small window for, oh, it's a working lunch and et cetera, but it's pretty strict. It can't just be, oh, we're networking over lunch. That did not pass the sniff test when we asked Bruin about it. So, but again, always check with your program specialist. We're going to ask questions if we see something, and I know that's frustrating. Um, but really, we want to make sure that we're all taking care of the funds because we want them to stay with us, right? And also, there is that headline test. Proceed with caution. So, all right. Oh, good. I get to do student incentives too. Student incentives, another one that comes up a lot. So, it is important to remember that incentives may reward effort and achievement. Effort and achievement. That is not participation or attendance. So, for example, if obviously every day matters. We want to get kids in school, who attend, do better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Title One, or sorry, all title funds. And there's a specific letter from the department about attendance incentives. They consider it to be, you can't pay to participate. Even if it's a bouncy ball, it's still considered an attendance incentive. What you can do is, hey, everybody who, I don't know, grew this much in reading, we're going to give you a nominal incentive, which we'll talk about in a minute. Academic and behavior links to that, yes. Attendance is a no-go. The incentive must be nominal, not be non-monetary. Obviously, no one's handing out cash, and of nominal value. So, we've had folks or districts want to like, oh, we're gonna get this really cool prize and raffle it off. No, you can't do that because it's not of nominal value. It cannot be entertainment, right? Like you can't video games, A, they're expensive, and B, it's entertainment. So that's where we're at with incentives. You may notice that we're asking more questions about those things. Believe me, it's not because we like to pick them back and then reread them because I don't. But we are going to have questions when it seems like not all students can participate. Like if you say everyone who got an A in science, you're really limiting, students who don't, but maybe have made a big growth, right? There's a high percentage of the allocation that goes to incentives, much like food. Is it reasonable? High value items. And then there's that headline test. So we also have a brief on incentives and federal funds that we can put in the chat. One more slide, and then I get to give it back to Sarah. So some examples of okay things: books, STEM materials like at-home little fun projects, art supplies, educational games, little trinkets, right? I cannot think of what it's called, but there's some districts for a couple of years that were doing these little things that were like tied to social emotional learning. I cannot think of what they are, but they were cute. That's okay. Red light, gift cards, with the exception of Mickey and Evento, gift cards, video games, entertainment, expensive items. If these, yeah, fidget, it's like fidgets, but something else. It's like a brand name, Alicia. Fidgets are okay, right? Nominal value. Red light, those more expensive things are like blatantly entertainment. Is it bouncy ball entertainment? Okay, I guess, but not right. It's no. You can have all of those things. Give them away, donate it, or if they're donated to you or used from a different fund, have at it. You just can't use federal funds. Okay, I'm going to pause. Are there any questions? I threw a lot out at you, and it's clear as mud. Oh, Michelle McCabe, I see you gesturing, and I don't hear anything.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I had a question on the food when you said emergency food and water for students navigating housing instability. So can you just be a little bit more specific on that? So I had a student last year who family didn't, they weren't McKinney, they were, I don't know if they were McKinney-Vento. I can't remember. But often he would come to school not eating. I mean, he was getting food from school. So are you saying that we could have bought something to feed him during the day? Or what is that? What do you tell me? Give me a little bit more example on that one.
Good question. I'm gonna ask Sarah and if Amy's still on to help me out too.
Yeah.
So for example, yeah, go ahead, Sarah. You have an idea.
No, I was going to say we had a little bit of a conversation with Lexi about this. I think the key part of this one is that the McKinney-Vento program says, you should exhaust other resources first. You should exhaust other food resources for students navigating housing instability first. But if you do not have any funds, then if that child is coming to school hungry, you could use Title I funds to help support any student navigating. You'd have to confirm that they were McKinney-Vento eligible. You'd need to know that. But you could use Title I funds to provide them with food at school. If it's something, I assume it could be, you might even be able to send them home with something. We could double check that with Lexi. But I think the big thing I heard from Lexi was you do need to make sure that you've exhausted other resources first, and then you could use Title I funds. And those Title I funds can support any student experiencing housing instability, not just those who attend Title I schools. Sometimes there's some misunderstanding about that because, Title I is like you can only spend it in Title I buildings, except for when it comes to students navigating housing instability. Then any student in the district who qualifies for McKinney-Vento, you could use those Title I set-aside funds to support.
Thank you.
I know I've approved districts, they have a food pantry, that they keep stock, just, non-perishables, for students navigating housing instability. No one is going to come and say, Michelle, you gave something to this student over here who has a stable house. No one's gonna come and say that. All right. Good question. Anything else? All right. Well, I'm gonna turn it back to Sarah. This is a long
Okay.
one, so thanks for sticking with us.
We are going to talk about door number 3, but I do want to mention somebody asked where they could find this PowerPoint. We do send the PowerPoint out after the webinars with the any questions that were asked, with the answers to those. So as long as you are on our federal programs listserv, you will get that, or you could email one of us directly to get it. And we will be putting links. I just realized I can't put links in the chat while I'm sharing my screen, which makes it kind of difficult. But we will make sure that we put some links at the end of the webinar to our briefs page where you can find all the materials that are listed here. Sarah Martin is asking, what would be considered emergency food? Prepackaged snacks, granola bars, juice, chips. Yeah, that's a great question, Sarah. I don't know that we have a definition of emergency food. I think it's more, that would kind of be at your discretion, right? It probably wouldn't be something big and complicated, but it would be considered this child needs food. And so what can we do to provide it to them? We can check with Lexi to see if she has any more specific definition, but that sure sounds what you've described in there. Definitely sounds like it would fit the bill to me. Okay. And Jen put the federal funds and food brief in the chat for those of you who are tracking that. Okay, let's talk about door number 3, which is really just about making sure that how you're spending the funds aligns with how you said you were going to spend the funds. And if you've been to any of our office hours or webinars before, you have very likely seen this slide that shows the lifetime of federal funds. This year, our timeline was a little bit disrupted, but generally speaking, federal funds become available for obligation on July 1st of the year that they are allocated. And districts have a full 27 months to spend those funds. That time is broken up into 2 chunks. The first chunk we call the initial grant period. That is the first 15 months from July 1st through September 30th. So we just recently passed the initial grant period for those 2024-2025 funds. But even if you don't spend them all, you still have an additional 12 months after that to spend them as carryover. And carryover applications are going to open, I think this Friday. I can't even believe that that's true. For any of those remaining funds, SIP Budget Narrative and EGUMS talk to each other. And if you have any money left over that you haven't claimed by the 14th of November, which was Friday, then your district will see on your dashboard a carryover application available to you. And we know that when you are planning, when you submit your budget narrative, that is your best plan. That's what you believe you're going to be doing. And that plans sometimes change. So it is absolutely fine to change your narrative. What we're trying to communicate here is that it's important to tell us if you make a change. And that's not only because we want to make sure that you are using the funds in an allowable way, but it also really helps you with planning. So we refer to this as reconciliation, the process of comparing how you're spending funds to what your approved narrative says. And we know sometimes you have to pivot pretty quickly and things can get lost. You may know to yourself, yep, this is allowable, we can make this change, that's great. You still need to revise your narrative and let us know that you're doing something different. And so when you do that reconciliation process where you are checking in to see whether your spending and your approved narrative align, it'll allow you to identify errors. That does sometimes happen. And it also helps you plan for, okay, we've spent this much so far. Here's how much is left. We can start thinking about carryover and doing some planning for how we want to leverage those funds to continue to meet our needs. So it is really important that your approved narrative and your spending align. We would, in an ideal world, you would be having those conversations maybe quarterly, but at the very least, they should be happening in the spring. This is another example. We talk a lot about the importance of program and fiscal staff really being in good communication. We know many of you have those strong relationships, but where you're checking in to see, okay, here's where we are with the budget. Do we see anything in our budget that's not lining up with what we said we were going to do? Do we need to make a change to the budget narrative? And you can make those changes. We'll talk about on the next slide, the ways in which you can do that. In addition to just looking to see if you're doing something new, that would definitely be a reason to change the budget narrative. But if you also made a decision to really lean into, we said we were going to do A, B, and C, and we've decided to drop A and spend a lot more on B and C. If the amount that you're changing in your budget narrative is 10% or more for that particular line item, you should probably make that revision. Again, when we do monitoring, we're comparing your budget narrative to your spending, so we really want you to be doing the same thing throughout the year. That goes for positions as well, right? We take a look at your positions that you describe in your budget narrative, and we compare those with your expenditure reports and your time and effort reporting when you're selected for desk monitoring. And we're expecting to see, a through line connection between all three of those. So this reconciliation process is really the opportunity for you to make sure that you still have things in alignment. Again, understanding that changes need to be made, not a problem. We just need you to communicate with us through your budget narratives when you're making those changes. And how you make the change depends on which chunk of money or which part of the lifetime of the funds we're talking about. So if you're still in that initial grant year, if you're still in that first 15 months, you simply go into your budget narrative. I call it your dashboard. It's the page with all the blue lines where you can see all the grants that you receive, and you hit the revise button, and that pulls the budget narrative back out into your court so you can make changes, and then you resubmit it and we reapprove it and you're done. If we're talking about carryover narratives, so on Thursday, thank you, whoever put that in the chat, on Thursday, when the carryover narratives open, if you submit your carryover narrative and we approve it, and then in March you realize an adjustment needs to be made, you can't pull it back out. Our system is too old and antiquated to do that. So we've created a workaround through this carryover narrative revision form that you would fill out and email to whoever is your regional contact for title programs, either Amy or Jen or I, and just let us know what you're changing. That's how you would revise a carryover narrative. And then sometimes it's necessary to send funds back. Sometimes districts accidentally claim from the wrong grant or they overclaim. Sometimes they determine that they spent funds on something that, oops, that was not allowable. And so sometimes a reimbursement needs to be made to ODE, and we do have a smart sheet. Our friends in our fiscal office have created a smart sheet that you can fill out to complete and send those funds back, and the funds get deposited back into your grant so that you can reclaim them appropriately. We do want to remind you that private schools, we know that you do your consultation with private schools, and hopefully during that consultation, they already know how they want to spend their funds, but sometimes that's not always the case, and we don't ever want districts to have to delay submission of their budget narrative because they don't yet know what the private school's plan for equitable services are. And so often a district will say, hey, here's the school, here's the amount, and we'll make sure that whatever the school is doing, we assure that it will meet the requirements of the program. Once you know what they're doing, you really should go in and revise that line item to actually include a description of whatever the activity was that was being paid with the equitable share. Okay. That's the last of our 3 doors. Any other questions that have popped up or you would like clarification on before we go to our bonus round? I wish we had some jaunty music to play, but we do not. Okay. All right, Jen.
All right, we're almost there. And by the way, we will not leave you without giving you a super quick federal update. Not that there's much to say, but okay, bonus round, red light, green light. All right, so we're going to give you 3 scenarios, and we'd like you to put in the chat if it's a red light, which would be never allowable, a yellow light, which would be maybe, but we need more information if, and a green light is, yeah, no questions, no problem. So, scenario 1, furniture. Elephant Elementary has a program for reading and math and delivers like small group instruction. And they want to use Title 1A funds to
I couldn't
purchase.
find anything about
Oh, Siri, I didn't ask you. Sorry. They want to use kidney tables for student groups, and they also want to get a chair for each teacher and a filing cabinet. What would you say? Red light, yellow light, green light? All right. Would anyone, I see lots of yellows. Heidi says, do other schools have something similar with general funds? These are good questions. There's definitely some red lights. Okay. Well, the answer we believe is correct. It is a yellow light. So, and here's why. So furniture is generally allowable, like for instruction. Not for like, hey, everybody needs a desk. Like that is something that should be used, purchased through, other funds, right? But for Title I intervention group, sure, that could work. Kidney cables, yep. We've even approved like bookshelves or filing cabinets. The biggest issue with this one is the chair for the teacher. That's not allowable. It's not everyone should be getting a chair somewhere else, but also like it's not necessarily, it's not about student instruction, right? So that is the answer for that one. So congratulations if you said yellow. Red is also okay, but good to be cautious too, but it's a yellow for us. So, all right, scenario 2. This is food. Buffalo High School, it's high school, so low family participation tends to plague middle and high schools. And they really want to encourage participation in the site council. So what we'd like to do, or what they would like to do, is use federal funds to provide dinner at monthly meetings. Red, 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 red flag, yellow, yellow, red, 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 red. Okay, I'm losing track. So, yes. This is a red light for us, and here's why. We did mention that meals can be an exception. This is not one of them. And because number one, not all families are participating and benefiting. Like this is site council. It's a small group, right? So it's not a larger event to get people to come for a very specific reason. You could make the argument that one meal might be okay for like a cultural event or something like that, like a one-time thing. Monthly is also a problem. I mean, the headline test, you could not buy dinner monthly for family engagement, even if it was for the whole school. The cost of that is likely unreasonable. And number two, what would that look like if your school district was in Oregonian or wherever? That is a headline test issue that we would likely flag. So again, meals are the exception, not the rule. All right, real good. Scenario 3. And I kind of feel like I gave you the answer this one. All right, so all graduating 8th graders at Cat Middle School, they're going to go to the movies. And we're going to use Title IV funds to pay for tickets and popcorn and soda for each student and the bus to get us there. Red, 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 red across the board. Yes, so we have red, it's a red light as written. Couple things with this. Number one, it is not related to any content. Like, yes, you're graduating, and that is a huge thing that we should celebrate and all of those things. Unfortunately, title funds can only pay for things that are connected to the content, right? So that's a no-go for that. Also, you could make a case for using title funds for something like this if the movie, like if it was Selma, if you wanted to go see Selma after studying civil rights movement, you can make a case for that academic connection there, right? You could pay for tickets, you could pay for transportation, not for the snacks. So that's where we're at. Any questions about the 3 scenarios that we lay out? Or if you'd like to give us your own scenario. All right. And I can finish it out, Sarah. I don't know that we ever talked about who's going to finish it out. Okay. All right. So just some key takeaways. Know the purposes and rules that govern each title program. Should you memorize the entire law or the entire Edgar book? No, I don't either. Have a general understanding and always ask questions. Always ask questions. Develop a system for your district. You know, if you have many Title I buildings or many buildings and many different people making requests, like how are you going to vet them that is not burdensome in terms of like we're ordering 4 pencils, but in a way that you know and you can stand behind what was purchased. And I know that gets hard, especially with like P cards being used, but what is the process there? What is your training? Document everything required. We keep it in the SIP budget narrative the best we can. We are working with the SIP budget narrative as it is right now. So make sure you keep a copy on your end too, because educate staff, we talked about that, and then build relationships. Each district obviously works a little different, but are the program staff and the people, you know, focusing on whatever your Title II projects are, your Title IV funded projects are, talking to the fiscal staff and making sure those are clear. We've seen things, you know, miscodings happen all the time. So make sure that those things are going on. And then of course, reach out with questions. We've got some more resources on the next slide and our contact information. I do want to give you a federal update, if that's okay. Not a big one, but as you know, the shutdown ended last week. I know obviously the House is in session today. The Senate I don't know. I don't know if they're in session right now. But government is back open. We've had some contact, or other states have also had contact with the Department of Ed because they had to bring back all of the students, all of the workers who were ripped. So they are being brought back. Yes, things are still iffy, right? I mean, you'll notice there are headlines today about, oh, we're going to move this office over here, this office over here. I think we're a long way from that because there's a lot of legal stuff going on. But the good news is that some of the people that we contact and we rely on to ask the really tough questions, we've heard from, or another state has heard from. So stay tuned. This continuing resolution that was passed goes through the end of January. So they need to get something by the end of January, or we're doing this again. There's not a huge appetite. Like, that looks real bad. Like, let's not do this again. And that will fund federal fiscal year 25, which will influence 26, 27 funds for schools, right? So they need to get that done. They need to get a federal fiscal year 25 thing to go, right? And then they have to start planning for federal fiscal year 26, which starts in January or July. So they got a lot of work to do. That's where we're at. So we'll keep you updated as we know more. But the good news is they are open, and we're doing our thing. So. All right. Questions, comments, concerns? I think we can stop recording.